There's a law that has affected the judicial system in California. People that commit a crime might be able to get out of it by saying they have mental illness. Can you tell us what this law is about?
Sure. It's called mental health diversion, and it came into being in 2018 to address the very real issue, the intersection between mental illness and criminality and criminal conduct. And the idea behind it was to attempt to reduce recidivism by addressing mental health. But with all good intentions, there was a twist in the way that this was implemented and created unintended consequences and unintended victims.
So if they have mental illness, they commit a crime, then they can have that dismissed because they have mental illness and get treatment, is that?
Yes, and there's are two eligibility factors. One is that you have a mental disorder that has been diagnosed by a mental health professional during the past 5 years, and it was diagnosed by not necessarily a psychologist or psychiatrist. They were very expansive, and they just said it could be a marriage and family counselor. It could be a social worker that diagnosed you. You could potentially qualify. The unintended consequences are both the people that are doing the diagnosing, but also the types of diagnoses that qualify include, for instance, a caffeine disorder. So if you don't get your coffee and you're going through withdrawals, then potentially you would qualify under one of these factors.
So how would average Californians look at this? How would they get impacted?
Average Californians would probably be surprised, first of all, at the scope of mental health diversion being applied, even if you've committed an attempted murder, if you've committed a robbery, if you've committed an assault, if you've stalked somebody. People would be surprised that the type of crime that potentially you could be eligible for a mental health diversion. I think that's one way. I think the second way is that the courts have really felt that they don't have discretion to say no. And so really, I mean, I think people would be surprised at how courts feel boxed in, how they feel like they don't have the ability to say no or to do what would make sort of common sense adjustments, and that they should be using their knowledge, their experience, their discretion to make the best possible decisions, not just to treat mental health illness, but also to protect the public.
Can you tell us about the mental health diversion? What does it mean for people that don't know about it? So does the court allow them to go get mental?
The purpose of mental health diversion is you're going to receive treatment that relates directly to the mental disorder that was related to your crime. Those things will be tightly connected. The reality is that they're not. But the idea is you go through a treatment process. You can be on this mental health diversion for 2 years. If you are successful, then at the end of that 2 years, the case is dismissed as if it never happened. So whether it's a vandalism or a robbery, whether it's an assault, whatever the crime is, it's as if it didn't happen. And the premise is that by treating the individual, it's likely that they will not recidivate. They won't commit a new crime.
So now, when was the time you saw that something is wrong with this? It's not working as it was?
In the beginning, judges were struggling to see the connection between mental illness and the crime. And an example, I mean, I was trying to use an example of, for instance, a caffeine disorder or a bereavement disorder. The most typical is a post-traumatic stress disorder. So, for instance, if someone had been sexually molested as a child, they potentially could suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. But linking that to the crime that they've committed, a residential burglary, a robbery, a car burglary, is very tenuous. And so from that period of time, from 2018 to 2020, 2023, many judges really had difficulty with that linkage. And so mental health diversion wasn't limited, but there
were
were
limited cases because they say this doesn't relate to them. What happened in 2023 that?
In 2023, there was a bill that changed that presumption so that simply having the mental illness, now it is presumed that you have, that the mental illness
caused you to commit the crime.
And the burden then shifts to the people, to the state, to prove that they didn't, that we have to prove a negative. We have to prove that your mental illness didn't require you to, or didn't impact you, wasn't related to you committing that crime. There have been some very recent cases, including a case that just came out on April the 4th of this year, where the criticism by the appellate court overturned a court's denial, defendant the right to have mental health diversion. And this individual reported being molested and assaulted at 14 and 17, and later was involved in a series of car burglaries with a couple of other individuals. And the court said, I don't see this connection. The appellate court said, no, the burden is on the people to prove that there wasn't a connection. And so that change is really dramatic. In effect, what's happened is it's like a baseball game where at the end of the game, it's 0-0, and what we're saying is, okay, so the home team wins. Well, that isn't the rule. I mean, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. That's what a presumption is. And the presumption here is, well, if you have the disease, it has to be connected, and the people have to prove it. But in effect, we're proving a negative, which when you think about it,
makes it a lot harder.
It's almost impossible to prove that negative.
Now, what percentage of people, criminals, have these like mental illness issues?
So it's hard to say. We have a tremendous a growth of
different kinds of disorders. You mentioned coffee. Is there any other examples that we might find?
Well,
caffeine?
Bereavement. So for instance, if you've lost a loved one or a close family member and you are suffering depression, PTSD, schizophrenia, and so forth, but we have a lot of bipolar. So if you're manic or depressive, all of that would be included. And so the general population that are law-abiding have a lot of these mental health disorders. And so part of what has happened is...
So the court will immediately take that. So if there's some mental illness that somebody has and then they committed a crime, they immediately will say these two are connected, right? You are doing that because you had a mental illness.
And in large part because of this presumption, because there is this presumption that these things are true. What that really does is it eliminates analysis so that you don't actually ask those hard questions. Were these two things related? Instead, the default is, of course they are, because there's a desire to treat over everything else, that the sense is, well, we'll just treat the issue and somehow that will solve the problem.